name is Kimberly Seals Allers. I am the founder of Irth, which is a new Yelp-like app for Black and Brown women and birthing people to find and leave reviews of their OBGYNs, birthing hospitals, and pediatricians.
Did you know that racism and bias in care has been directly linked to the Black maternal and infant mortality crisis? Black and Brown women and birthing people need to birth with Irth. Irth is in the word birth, but we dropped the B for bias. Is a new Yelp-like review and rating app for Black and other birthing people of color to leave and find reviews of OBGYNs, birthing hospitals, and pediatricians. Join the movement to use our collective experiences to inform and protect each other and to bring transparency and accountability to the medical system. Reclaim your birthright to birth without bias. Irth is available now in the Google Play and Apple App stores. Download today. Search reviews for yourself. Leave a review to help others. Visit earthapp.com to learn more. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Irth app.
We are on a mission to eradicate racism and bias and pregnancy care and birth for Black and Brown folks, but also to shift the conversation about motherhood. And this is part of what brings us here today as our series of conversations, really talking about some of the issues that are facing all mothers and always having a lens on Black motherhood. And so I'm so excited to be here. Walter Lippmann said that we are all captive to the pictures in our heads. And those pictures are increasingly created by film, by books, words and images, and now podcasts, and especially social media. And so what does this all mean for motherhood? What does it mean for us? And what does it mean for those who are engaged in the business of storytelling, particularly as it relates to mothers? So I'm excited about this exciting panel of mamas, authors, scholars, and generally badass rabble-rousers who are in the business of storytelling across many different spectrums. Let me get to introductions. So I'll start with the way it appears in my screen. Tanya Lewis Lee, everyone wave. Tanya is a creative producer who has developed and produced content across television and streaming platforms. If you didn't see her adaptation of Spike Lee, She's Gotta Have It for Netflix, you've got to see it. And today we are celebrating the launch of Tanya's film Monster on Netflix. It's on Netflix starting today. Please watch it. It's based on the Walter Dean Myers novel, an incredible story, now on Netflix today. So please, please, please go check that out. Tanya has also produced unscripted work such as I Sit Where I Want, the legacy of Brown versus Board of Education for Nickelodeon, and the documentary film Crisis in the Crib for the Office of Minority Health. As an author, Tanya has written 3 published children's books, including Please Baby Please, which is still a fan favorite, all the Please Puppy Please and all the Please Baby Please series. And as an entrepreneur and women's health advocate, Tanya founded Movita Organics, an organic vitamin supplement company. So I encourage everyone to check out Movita and all the ways that Tanya is promoting women's health and always keeping me on point. I was just sipping my bone broth and thinking about you, Tanya, because you're always trying to keep me on it.
Always. Well, we always got to keep working on it. Never ends.
We got to keep working on it. All right. Next, we have Anna Malaika Tubbs, an author, scholar, and former first partner of Stockton, California. Anna is an author, advocate, educator, and scholar, and is currently a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Cambridge. Anna grew up abroad in Dubai, Mexico, Sweden, Estonia, and Azerbaijan. We got to talk about that. And influenced by her exposure to all kinds of cultures and beliefs, Anna's mother's work advocating for, I skipped the line. Anna is inspired to bring people together through the celebration of difference. Motivated by her mother's work advocating for women's and children's rights around the world, Anna uses an intersectional lens to advocate for women of color and educate others. She has published articles on issues ranging from mass incarceration to the forced sterilization of Black women, as well as the importance of feminism, intersectionality, and inclusively. And she is her first book, which we're so excited, and we're hoping that will hit the New York Times bestseller list for Mother's Day weekend. The 3 Mothers: How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation, and which was published by Flatiron Books in February 2021. Such a great read, such an amazing stories of these mothers who have been in many ways erased from history. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then next, and certainly not least, we have the amazing filmmaking duo, the wife and wife team, Ricki Lake and Abby Epstein, who are filmmakers and co-founders of the business of. Such a dynamic duo. Ricki is the Emmy-winning talk show host. Abby is the director. They are the team behind the business of, a media company that launched with their groundbreaking documentary, The Business of Being Born. People are still talking about this film. It was so eye-opening, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is so important. Ricki and Abby also collaborated on We the People, an award-winning Netflix documentary that looks at cannabis prohibition through a human rights lens by focusing on children with cancer. And they are the executive producers of the documentaries Breast Milk and The Mama Sherpers. And I'm super excited. In 2021, Ricki and Abby will be releasing later on this year, The Business of Birth Control, the much anticipated expose on the complex relationship between the pill and women's health and liberation. Tanya and I were just talking about this the other day, right? So important, guys. I saw the trailer at Latham's The Continuum Conference, and I'm still talking about it. So many eye-opening moments. I can't wait to share this with the world. The Business of is currently producing a free monthly body literacy series. And with the newest episode, The Pill is Not a Panacea. Say that again. The Pill is Not a Panacea. Featuring Kiki Palmer, Alyssa Vitti, and Dr. Kirsty Cunningham, which is releasing on May 19th. Cool. So everybody visit thebusinessof.life. Can't wait for that film, and definitely need to be talking about The Pill is Not a Panacea. Ooh, Lord. But for this conversation today, so many things that we need to be talking about. You know, we're here today to really talk about the ways that motherhood is being shaped in the media. And when we think about the history of it, you know, going back to as far back as Leave It to Beaver, or to more recently, particularly for Black mothers, A Cosby Show, motherhood has been shaped by the things that we've seen on television and in our movies and in our culture. And now that also includes books, films, podcasts, documentaries, and more. And so, you know, but with all this happening, is this good or bad for mothers? Is it actually improving the motherhood experience or not? And so that's what we want to dig into today. And I'm going to start with a question to all of us, to everyone here, around the fact that you have chosen to center motherhood in your craft, right? And everyone here has some theme of motherhood that has been a thread in their work at some point. And I would love just to hear for you to share with folks why, you know, including motherhood in your body of work was so important to you. You want to start, Tanya?
Sure. Well, first, I'd say that art in general is critical to understanding who we are, right? I mean, art really does help shape how we see ourselves, how we think about who we are, what our humanity is. And so, as you've said, art is really essential so that we understand how we even deal with one another. And so when it comes to storytelling, especially around motherhood, for me, you know, I really started my creative, I'm a lawyer by trade, but I really started my creative work through the eyes of my children. You know, when my children were young, and I could see how my Black and brown children were trying to process the world and where they fit as Black and brown children, right? So what I mean by that is literally, I saw my children, my daughter, watching an episode of Rugrats one day, and they're kind of gray, and she's fair complexioned, and she was looking at them and looking at herself saying, they're gray. I'm gray. And I was like, well, you're okay. like, you know, realizing that she's seeing so many images, but not seeing images of herself. Seeing my 3-year-old brown son say to me, oh, people get darker when they're in the sun. And I say, you mean people tan? And he said, yeah, well, I'm already tan. I said, well, you're brown. And watching this little 3-year-old boy touch his face and say, I'm brown, and to understand as a mother, what does that mean to him? Was he okay with that? Waiting a few days to have another conversation about, look at these beautiful brown legs, what do you think? And he's like, oh, I love them. I'm like, phew. But like, so my work really starts with my children, and really trying to make sure that what I'm creating are images or stories or something that represents the complexity of who we are as people of color. That's my interest. Who are we as people of color and our full humanity, good, bad, ugly, indifferent. And so I think being a mother myself is really why a lot of the work, as you've put it, and it's interesting because I hadn't really thought about it that way, may have a mother's point of view, but it's really about trying to showcase a sense of humanity of who Black and Brown people are in this world to sort of help try to make a difference.
Yeah.
Important. Anna, you want to go next?
Absolutely. So I'll go back to talking about my mom and in all the places that we live that you mentioned in the bio. She would always comment on how mothers were treated in these communities and in these societies. And she would say, you need to pay attention because the way mothers are treated will be an indicator for every single other thing that we're looking for in terms of health and wellness in our countries and in our society. And she had traveled a lot even before having children, but in her journey as a mother, she paid very close attention to how she was treated when she had my sister and I in the United States versus having my brother in Sweden, for instance. And even in her own work advocating for women's rights, how mothers were treated. And so I always grew up paying attention to mothers and motherhood and knowing the power and the influence of motherhood, the importance of motherhood, and really finding it quite staggering that not many saw motherhood in the same way and in the same light, and the relationship of motherhood to our society in general. And then you add the layers of race and you add the layers of class and how little people were paying attention to the importance of having supports and protections in place for mothers. So when I started my PhD work that led into the book, I knew I was going to do something around mothers and something around addressing the erasure of Black women very specifically. I completely agree with Tanya in terms of there's a lack of representation of us as whole human beings, as Black women especially, who are complex beings, who have pain, yes, and also love, who experience grief, but also experience joy and experience happiness. And I just keep going back to what my mom always taught me and continues to say, when we focus on mothers, there can be such a culture shift. And I think even in saying with these three men, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, James Baldwin, we celebrate them and their birthdays even every year. And very few of us stop to think about who else was in the room when they were born. They didn't just pop out of nowhere. It's not like they birthed themselves, but instead they are products of women who nourished them and who cared for them and who taught them, families, parents. They were human beings themselves. And I think there's something just really powerful about centering motherhood, especially because so few people do it, that it's really an honor for me to join in this conversation around mothers and in shaping the culture and the narrative around how we treat such an important group of people.
So true, so true. I got all my amens out. Abby and Ricki, you want to share a little bit about why you all brought this to your work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't like a conscious decision to focus on a project. Like the business of being born kind of stemmed from my experience and asking the question of why things are the way they are. And I, had the platform of my show where we celebrated and represented all kinds of people in relationships, mothers with their children. And it was in the making of that film that I really found my calling. And it was just, I don't have a PhD. I haven't been, educated in any way other than I've had life experience and I've watched like humanity through the lens of hosting that show. And for me, looking back on the business of being born, I think one of the most powerful things about the film is seeing women give birth on their own terms, seeing the visually, watching women in their power. I think that has just stayed with so many women that like they see, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. And, I'm super proud of that film and the impact it's had. It's, but I never really consciously thought, oh, okay, my life's calling, this piece of material would have stemmed from me becoming a mother, and it's been a wild ride, but there's so much work that needs to be done in continuing to raise awareness, particularly about women of color and in the maternal space. So it's my honor to be a part of this community and this talk today.
I know I was thinking as Kimberly was talking, Ricki, that it's funny how, we have very different mothers, And Ricki has said
I was going to mention that, and I just, because there's so many ways. I don't mean to cut you off, Abby, but there's so many areas of topic in this topic, but I don't have a maternal mother. My mother's alive and well. I don't know where she lives. I don't have a relationship with my mother. I really have had a very strained relationship. And Abby has the opposite. Like, her mother is the salt of the earth. She's the, and she's very much adopted me. But yeah, as you were saying, sorry to cut you off.
No, but that's what I was going to say. Like, my mother threw Ricki's book party in New York, when Ricki published her book. And sometimes Ricki would say, I can't believe, your mother is showing up at things for me that, my mother doesn't even know about. But I think in some ways it's, I don't know. I think that is part of your experience, Ricki, because I think you so consciously wanted to become a mother in a certain way. And that was really a gift that I think Ricki taught me, and I think I didn't quite understand. Like, when I met Ricki, I was directing the play, The Vagina Monologues, off Broadway, and Ricki was in my cast, and that's how we met. So I'd always been centered in this, vagina world and working with very powerful women all the time. I was always kind of surrounded by very empowered women, but I would say I was definitely missing the maternal piece, connecting it to the empowerment piece. Like, for me, it was just, it was like about, ending violence and advocacy and saving the women and ending genital mutilation. It wasn't about midwifery and empowered birth. It just wasn't there. And Ricki, I think, really showed me that at the beginning when we decided to make The Business of Being Born. I was very much, hadn't been pregnant yet, was very much looking forward to my epidural and just kind of getting this over with, at that point. And I think that, like Ricki was saying, I think that idea, when I watched the home video of her birthing her son in her bathtub, it was really life-changing for me, because I think a lot of motherhood and childbirth, right, takes place behind closed doors. We don't see how other people mother. And I know sometimes, when I've had a shameful moment mothering, when I've screamed or, not been proud of myself, and I talk to a friend and I tell them, and then they're like, oh, honey, they're like, I just threw a shoe, don't worry. It's you're like, okay, but so much of it, it's we have to keep up these fronts that we have it together, and everything happens behind closed doors, like birth. So I think, seeing Ricki give birth and then, making that movie with her. I mean, my motherhood journey is in the movie accidentally. But yeah, it's very interesting, to think about, that I guess that place that drives us all into this work. It's fascinating to hear all of you.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I think what's also interesting about what you were saying, Abby, is the ways that women's bodies and our experiences have been separated. So to your point, there is a whole nother, unfortunately viewed as separate movement that is about women's rights and reproductive rights. And then there's mothers on this other side. And I think that's the danger, right? We've been divided in terms of our women's selves and our mother selves, and those two often are in conflict. And then one side doesn't embrace the other. And we need to figure out, how do we make this actually a women's movement that looks at all the roles that women are likely to play in their life, which includes being a mother disproportionately. But 80-something% of women in this country become mothers at some point. And so I think that division and that separation between what I call folks who still have unstretched uteruses and those who have a stretched uterus has to kind of come together. And that's important for us to, put all of these things in the same pot, as well as kind of be clear about what's unique in that mother thread, right? And I think that's important. Also, just want to shout out all the mothers who mother differently, right? And so the ways that your mother, Abby, has been mothering Ricki, and all the ways that mothers show up for each other. And, even for those who have not given birth, but many aunties aunties are mothers, and grandmothers are mothers, and so just wanted to embrace all the mothers in all the ways that showed up. I was curious what you were saying about these things about being seen and unseen, because I find that particularly with Mother's Day, it's a highly commercialized version of celebrating mothers, right? It's all about the gifts and the flowers and usually the overpriced brunches, and it's like, where's actually this acknowledgement of mothers? And for me, there's that version, and then there's kind of like what goes on behind the scenes, this backstory to mothering, which so many of us are clueless about. So many of us are like, wait, I didn't know that. So many of us are like, we didn't even know that happened. I feel like that's what I tried to accomplish with The Big Letdown, this behind the scenes story of breastfeeding and the ways that it's influenced by commercial interests and feminism and pediatrics. And this is something that you, Abby, and Ricki did spectacularly with The Business of Being Born. And I think that's why it still resonates with folks, because it was a behind the scenes world that people were like, wait, what? They're making how much money off of doing what? And like, people just don't know. And that's really dangerous. So why is it important? Because you guys have really built the business to tell that behind the scenes story of birth, of, what's going on in the cannabis industry, now what's going on with birth control pills. Why focus on that part of it? Why was that important to you both?
Because we're both badasses and we're naive. Like, I think, when we put out The Business of Being Born, we honestly thought that that we were going to be just adored for it. We thought the medical world, we're finally shedding light on this. And I think we struck a nerve. And for me, I can speak for myself, like, having been an actress most of my life and been a talk show host for so long, it just feels so good to do a piece of material that is important, that is like impactful, that raises questions. Like I don't know. It just feels like I want to know why things work. And with, We the People, that wasn't really in my interest. Like, it was my husband's interest in cannabis, but it feels really good to just put my name on something that really does stretch the envelope, or, just can potentially, be a positive change and particularly for women,
And I think you also, Ricki, it's interesting how I think, like, in making the film, we never had an agenda in the movie of like, let's tear down the obstetric community and attack the way they did birth. They did feel that that's what we were doing in the end, unfortunately. But we actually, like, the real motive behind the movie was, Ricki kept saying to me, I wish I knew all of this before my first birth, because she had gone on this kind of educational journey between the first and the second to kind of, which a lot of women sometimes do, like, things didn't go as planned the first time around. And that's when Ricki started diving, going to birth conferences and like meeting Ina May Gaskin and, like diving really deep into it. And so that was really the motivation. And I think that, like I was saying before, I didn't get it until she gave me Ina May Gaskin's book, Spiritual Midwifery. And then she gave me Robbie Davis Floyd's book,
Birth as an American Rite of Passage.
Birth as an American Rite of Passage. And then I had these two, like a sociologist looking at it or an anthropologist looking at birth. And then, the sort of godmother of birth in this country in some ways. I felt like, okay, like, now I get it. Like, women are being duped, like, holy, you know what I mean? Like, oh my God, like, women are having something really, really precious taken away from them, and they don't even know it. They don't even know it. They think that this is like good healthcare. You know what I mean? They think that they're getting, and that's when the wheels start ticking. And I think that's something that, again, like Ricki was saying, we were naive. We didn't realize like how provocative The Business of Born was going to be in the beginning. It definitely over the years, I think the medical community has softened to it as trends have changed now and people want doulas and midwives, they've softened to it. But I do think that, we have, and a similar thing happened with our new movie, The Business of Birth Control, because we both read a book that was given to us called Sweetening the Pill. And it was written by this woman, Holly Griggs Spall. And it really starts off with her experience coming off of this birth control pill, Yasmin, which had literally led her to believe she was psychotic for 10 years. Literally, like, all kinds of meltdowns, anxiety attacks. I mean, all these problems that all came from this pill. And then we started, Ricki and I started looking at our own history of birth control use and talking to other women and realizing, oh my God, like this is just another area where, women are they're not being told. They're not, really getting the full story. They're getting like a half story, and they're not getting the full picture. And worse than that, they're being gaslit because they're having side effects or experiences and they're being told it's in their head or that, and it just, I think that's, again, like those are the kind of places that I feel like we like to jump in. And we try to do it in a way that's not too, I don't think we approach it in that kind of like Michael Moore style of like, we're just going to like bang down the doors and prove this point. We try to do it through stories, through narratives, through anecdotal stories and back it up with research.
Yeah, I think that's just tremendous. I mean, there's a whole world of things that we don't know that we have just come to accept as women. And sometimes it's really sad, sometimes it makes me sad. And seeing that clip of the Business of Birth Control movie really made me sad. Like, wow, we've been accepting this and we have been gaslit, and there are actually problems here that nobody's really talking about, which of course is about the commercialization, but that's a whole nother thing. But I think to that point around how culture was able to kind of catch up with the film, with the Business of Being Born, to say, hey, actually now doesn't look so crazy, right? Like this is all true. These are the things that people actually want now. And so what a great example of how culture can actually lead the way. I mean, how films can actually lead the way in driving culture. And I think that's an important thread to always remember. Like we, as storytellers, there's power in, kind of being the change we want to see, for lack of a cornier phrase, but to lead and then for the rest of the world to follow. And I think, kind of doing that requires telling these backstories and using storytelling. And, when we think about many things that are going on in the world, the things that we're trying to deal with, the Black maternal health crisis, Tanya, right now, you're working on a documentary that looks at this issue from a behind the scenes perspective. Tell us a little bit about this film project, please.
Yeah, it's interesting as Abby was talking, about being gaslit. I mean, the thing, that makes me angry, right? Like I get angry about it. It's just how much we are gaslit about birth, the history of how we even got to this place where we are a bit. And the film that I'm working on is really tackling or trying to understand the landscape of the US maternal mortality crisis that we're in. Centering Black women in this conversation. I think that white women certainly have had their own experiences, but Black women are the most vulnerable in this, right? And, when we talk about midwifery in particular, why has midwifery been eradicated in the United States of America? Let's talk about that, talking about slavery and where that really comes from. And when you begin to really have these conversations around race, what you begin to understand is that not only are Black people vulnerable and dealing with the consequences of racism, but it impacts all people. So if you fix the problem for those that are most vulnerable, you fix the problem for all of us, right? And so, it's a bit for me trying to set the record straight a little bit, as well as showing women what the options are out there for them, right? I mean, as Ricki and Abby have done with the Business of Being Born, empowering some women for sure, but really trying to make sure also that it is not a doom and gloom kind of thing. You know, the issues are deep and hard. It's been a long time for me working my way into telling this story. I have been doing the work around infant and women's health for a long time now. Kimberly and I met along those roads. And so it's taken me a while to really figure out how to get my arms around how do you tell a story about something that's so big and has so many different facets to it, and really shrinking it down to the human story and the lived experience. Because that's how we really learn about things, seeing people go through, whether it's going through birth and what the different types of birthing there are out there, understanding, you know, what's the different kind of care that an obstetrician gives versus a midwife? What's the difference between a midwife and a doula? There's so much confusion out there. People confuse midwives and doulas all the time. What's the difference between a certified nurse midwife and a CPM and a CPNM? Blah, blah, blah. I don't even know. You know, it gets so confusing. And so trying to sort of demystify the industry of birthing so that women can get to a place where we can have safe and dignified and glorious births. I mean, it's the foundation of everything. Birth is the foundation of everything. And unfortunately, you know, from what I've seen, it looks like white men decided that they wanted to get in on the goods and throw everybody out of the way. And here we are. And so it's like farm to table, right? We've gone so far out. Now we've got to come back and figure out how to really birth in the most humane way possible. And so, yeah, it's big, but hopefully our film will be ready for people to see next January.
I'm excited about that. I mean, to think about the enormity of, you know, the business of being born, and then add the enormity of race, right, and disparities. And, you know, I
would use the word inequity. I like to use the word inequity. I think disparity is a little confusing to people because I think it suggests that there's something on our end, our problem, when it's really an inequity that creates a problem. Sorry, I think the language
issue. And, you know, how do we kind of now tell the story based on that, you know, that tells a story of the inequity, that deals with the fact that actually this story has been told so far. Like, one of my biggest concerns is that, you know, because there's been so much doom and gloom, because people are almost, you know, thinking, and they've been told that part of the problem with Black maternal health was Black women. They have problematized us and what we're not doing, what we don't do. We don't get prenatal care. We're obese. We have high blood pressure, even though every study has shown that despite that, we still have poor outcomes, that it becomes harder to tell that story in a way. And I think—
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kimberly. I just want to say on that point, there is a narrative about Black women and who we are, and so therefore we are the reason for the poor outcomes. But that narrative gets reinforced by systems that make us look like we're doing that, as opposed to the reality is we're not all those things. And that's part of what we're demystifying. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
But, you know, it's important. And I think that, you know, and Anna and I have had this conversation, the ways that you show Black women in their complexities, and that we're not a monolith, and that we are multidimensional. And I think, you know, that's an additional layer to the important conversation. Anna, you were really focusing on revealing and showing us something unseen in terms of the subjects that you chose for your book. Tell us a little bit about why you felt that approach was important in terms of these quote unquote unseen people and figures in our history.
Something I think we agree on so many things, but one thing especially is the connection to human narrative and how much of a difference that makes for people understanding what we're talking about, whether that's in academic theory or whether that's in policy, or why we say things like we need parental leave and we need to acknowledge women's work within and outside of their home, et cetera. But without that human connection and understanding stories behind those reasons, it's very difficult for people to understand what we're advocating for and what we're fighting for or asking for. And so through Alberta King, Bertus Baldwin, Louise Little, it's not only a way for us to walk through history with them and even address the tropes that have tried to confine Black women and everything that Tanya is saying in terms of, you know, the Jezebel trope. This is to blame Black women for the violence and sexual violence that's been used against us. And the mammy trope. This is to blame us for not being paid enough for domestic work. This is where we want to be. We're happy to be the mammy. We're happy to to be Aunt Jemima, or the matriarch trope that instead of addressing the social ills that are separating Black families from each other, we're going to blame the Black woman for emasculating the male, or the welfare queen. And even up into the point of the strong Black woman, she can handle it all. We're all just going to applaud her for her resilience instead of thinking about the systems that are in place that are keeping her from being able to fully thrive. As much as she's fighting back and as much as she's doing and living life and seeking love and still finding joy, that's not a reason to then just accept the circumstances as if these are inevitable burdens that Black women have to carry. And so with all of these notions and my consciousness around this, I thought the best way is to walk through the story of 3 Black women, to see the world through their eyes, to understand what it was like for them before they were mothers, how they were creating life in so many ways through their activism, through their art, through the way they taught people around them, through their music, all of their different ways and passions and their trainings, and then how that translated into their motherhood. And then you see it's not a surprise that we have these sons in this case and children in all of our cases, and not only biological motherhood, this is mother work in so many ways. I see essential workers as doing mother work. This is the work of community, of caring, of really emphasizing the feminine, and in so many ways what has been deemed as the weaker qualities, really flipping that on its head and showing the power and the strength and the critical nature of those who are community oriented and thinking about others around them. Then we better understand men like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin, who have this very deep understanding of the human condition and are able to transform minds around that. But it's very connected again back into the women who nourished them and who brought them up and who themselves were constantly fighting for the right to define themselves for themselves.
Wow, that's a tremendous fight. And Abby and Ricki, did you want to jump in? I didn't want to leave the conversation around race just to the Black folks. And I know that you all are often intentional about your representation in your films and, making sure that how we weave the different, the ways that that experience shows up. Would you all like to just share something on that?
I was just thinking that, we might have some footage for you, Tanya. It's funny because there's, do you remember the shoot we did with Ina May Gaskin? Ina May Gaskin has a dead mother's quilt and that she makes. And every time she hears about a maternal death, she makes a square or she asks the family to send a square. And she was really consumed with this and nobody wanted to talk about it like ever. And you remember, Ricki, we're down on the farm. We have this footage of her like in a field on the farm with the quilt, laying the quilt out in a field and going through every square and telling us the story. I still remember the stories. I remember the woman that, nobody visited postpartum, the single mother, and she ended up having hemorrhage. I mean, like I remember the stories and do you remember even at our book party, Ricki, we brought Ina May in to be like the speaker of wrote this book, Your Best Birth. And it's all about these birthing options. And we're having this book party downtown and we bring Ina May in to be like the featured speaker. Ina May gets up on the microphone. I am not kidding you. She holds this entire room for 45 minutes to talk about dead mothers. I am not kidding you. People left. I mean, I turned around, people were like visibly uncomfortable, because they just wanted to like celebrate, the book and the movie. And, God bless her. Like she was like, no, I have the mic and I have my quilt. And she was like, we do not have a health czar. We do not have anybody tracking these deaths. We don't understand why these deaths are happening. And if you go to the UK, she would show us a book. In the UK, they have a book like this, and every maternal death is logged and investigated. And she said, it's just like, so I think about that now, Ricki, I think how we were sort of like, why is she, carrying on about this? And I think we knew the statistics when we were like making our film. And I feel like in the stories, especially like the one midwifery practice that we followed in Flatbush, and we wanted to make sure that, we also showed the history of the Black granny midwives in the South and, how they were eliminated. I mean, we wanted to have all those threads in there. And I think that now, it's interesting because next year will be the 15-year anniversary of the business of being born. And we're going to have the opportunity to, knock on wood, but get our film back. Because what people don't know about all this stuff, this is part of our journey as women in business, but we have not had the rights to our film for 15 years. Yes, they were held. They are held.
They weren't even exploiting it. So like they owned this title and they weren't even getting it to the masses. Like we want everyone, we would like to recoup and we'd like to educate everyone about.
Yeah. So we have this like interesting opportunity now, because now we're thinking, okay, if we're going to get the rights back, let's re-release it, but let's also film again, and let's pick up the story now and let's make like some companion pieces to go with the re-release. And let's really focus on, what's the picture now? Because in some ways, like you were saying, Kimberly, we've seen the impact, we've seen birth culture change, right, in somewhat over these 15 years. But then on the other hand, some things are going in the wrong direction, like we're talking about. And I think that, I know that piece of it for us, I think the Black maternal health piece has become like such a central piece for us. And I think when you start to talk about, like, even the episode that we did with Kiki Palmer that's airing on May 19th, you'll hear it. I mean, we're interviewing Kiki Palmer about PCOS, right? But then it's inescapable because she's talking about her family history, and she starts telling a story about how one of her aunt's babies was literally like torn apart in the delivery, that they were so rough with the baby that they literally tore the baby apart. I mean, and it's just, this is in her stories. These are the stories that we hear, what I mean, from Black women, even if we're talking about another area of like reproductive health, we're hearing constantly this echo of, this kind of mistreatment. So I think it'll be interesting to see now, like, I don't know where the business of being born like kind of sits 15 years later, revisiting it and trying to put more of a lens on these other angles.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell any story of motherhood without talking about race at this point, right? Like there is no story that can be told right now that doesn't include race, and because it has always been there. But I think where we are in our storytelling kind of culture is these things cannot just be, picked apart and separate. Like those are things that are very much, and as you were saying, even the history of midwifery includes a history of racism, right? And what happened to the Black granny midwives, and then what happened when white midwifery became the thing. I mean, all of it. So the birth inequities, the ways that we're being treated, the history of it, yes, the patriarchy, but also the racism. So it's a very complex picture. And I think that's the challenge, right? Like this story of motherhood is so complex, and people are trying to, grapple with it and tell the pieces, and hopefully we can move the experience of motherhood forward. Like for me, that's the goal. Like, how do we change this experience of motherhood for all through storytelling, through highlighting the back end, the backstories by humanizing Black women and all their complexities, by showing those folks who are unseen. Like these are all the ways that we can advance the experience of motherhood. And for me, make sure that no mother is left behind, right? Like that's my no mother left behind, that as we're in this, kind of storytelling and this narrative shift, that Black mothers are not left behind, no mother is left behind in terms of being advanced in that culture. Because I think that is critically important. But you were mentioning about what happened to your film, which was very concerning. And I know there is a business side to being able to tell the stories of motherhood. And I'm curious, and I think people listening will be curious to know, particularly for Abby, Ricki, and Tanya, what is the perspective of Hollywood on telling stories about motherhood? Like, is it accepted? Is it hard to get funding? Is there like, what is their perception of telling the story of motherhood? What has been your experience there?
I think it's interesting right now. I mean, I think people are curious and interested. I think people know there are issues out there. I mean, we just recently raised funding for our film, and actually, there was a lot of desire to participate financially to support the film and to support the voices of these women. You look at what's out there, and it's always controversial, right? It's never simple. Pieces of a Woman, was just on Netflix. So I do think that it depends on what it is. I think that women are having a moment. So we're in a place where I think people are a little more open to telling women's stories a bit right now. But look, it's a tough business. Don't get it twisted. This is not an easy business, no matter who you are. And so getting anything made is a minor miracle. getting any story out there, finally distributed, can take a long time and a lot of work. It is not easy. It is not easy work. So I can leave it at that. And the only other thing I wanted to say, just quickly, as storytellers too, I look at myself kind of like a portal. Like, there's so many people who are doing amazing work. I just have to shout out the people who are on the ground doing the work day to day for no shine, very little money, trying to really make change in the areas of maternal health and well-being. And it is just my honor and privilege to get to know them and maybe showcase them a little bit. And I will say also that yesterday there was a huge hearing. The Oversight Committee did a hearing on maternal health. And what's fascinating about that is I saw no news coverage of it, but it did happen. The Oversight Committee did have this hearing on Black maternal health, which is absolutely historic. And yet still no media coverage. But that will get out there.
I was sending out emails like, hey, I'd love to write about this. So interesting. I didn't even get to watch the news, but it's interesting that you say that it wasn't well covered, because I was also out here like, hey, we should be writing about this. I know that, Anita, you wanted to say something about the other thing, about the business stuff.
Oh, I was just going to add, I mean, documentaries are so hard to make. And Abby and I, our strong suit is not fundraising and asking people for money. It's been really challenging and, quite frankly, disheartening, because the Business of Being Born has really been this like incredible tool, this incredible seminal film that is evergreen, and it's always great for people to see, and yet we were not able to kind of break even on it, but we learned the hard way, and at this point you'd think we've gotten better at it, but the business of birth control was also really hard to raise money on, and also now in selling it, it's taking on big pharma, so there's a lot of places that probably can't, even if they wanted to distribute the film, or their hands are tied because their hands are in the money jar. So it's just it shouldn't be this hard, but we're determined, and we know that it it'll all make a difference, especially this new film.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like that commercial interest piece is such a dominant thread. We experience that even with Irth, because hospitals aren't excited that we are actually listening to Black and brown women, and we've created an app that doesn't invite them in, that doesn't include them, that doesn't care what they think. And because of that, we have our own challenges in terms of if we were looking for sponsors, because we are viewed as kind of anti the hospitals. And so it is really interesting to see the ways commercial interests really control and can influence what people can have access to. And I think, I'm hopeful that perhaps as more women become decision makers in these places, that maybe that will help. I was just thinking that my very first book came out back in 2005, The Mocha Manual to a Fabulous Pregnancy. And I am convinced that it was only because a Black female editor, Dawn Davis, shout out to Dawn, who now runs Bon Appetit, who bought that book. And she was pregnant at the time, and she understood that it was different for us. But 2005, for a publisher to say yes, like, I know that was having a Black woman in a decision-making position. Anna, what have you found on the book space around, the environment now for telling stories about mothers?
That's such a good question. And I'm sorry because our lawn is getting mowed right now. So if you're hearing any background noise, I put in my headphones. But I was going to say that for me, I was really privileged in so many different ways. I had an amazing agent looking out for me from the beginning, an incredible editor after an auction, like even having that as a debut author as a Black woman. And I knew going into it, so many Black female authors had told me, like, these are things you need to know. And this is one of the reasons that I had the privilege of knowledge. I knew what to ask for, what to advocate for, not to just take the first deal that was given to me, but to really say, this is something of value, something of worth, and I deserve to be supported in this. And I deserve to have a team behind me that understands the importance of this work. And so I could make this very informed decision, worked with a great, publishing house. But even despite all of those things, even Flatiron, that have been so supportive and believed in me, were not ready for how well the book was going to do. And so in March, it sold out everywhere. And despite people telling me, oh, that's like such a positive problem, that's not a good problem at all. How am I going to get on like a bestseller list, or how are more people going to know these stories if there's not books for them to buy? So you all just didn't print enough books. You didn't think that, with Black History Month and Women's History Month, and my book was released in February, that people were going to want to know the stories of these three women. So it was already like getting pigeonholed even from the beginning of, this is how many copies we're going to print of this book. So it's interesting because, yes, there is a space and a time right now where more and more people are telling women's stories. More and more people are realizing, oh, intersectionality is a thing. We have to tell many different kinds of women's stories. But then at the same time, don't fully follow through by being ready when, surprise, as we know, Black women are the leaders in so many ways of what we buy. Like, we are the trendsetters, and we decide what's going to do well. And we didn't think that this book on Black mothers was going to perform as well as it did. So I've had mixed feelings about it on both sides, and conversations, though, that have been really healing. And I think especially that they haven't only been with women and our experiences, but how others are starting to realize, oh, okay, this is something that is interesting, and it's something that's important for me to understand as well. What we were saying earlier, someone said this, it relates back to everything. And so I'm happy about that. I'm happy that people are excited, but I also need the industry to be ready and to support authors that are telling these unique stories, because it's like detrimental. I mean, not detrimental, it's not the be all end all, but it makes a difference that when I had a chance to make it on the list, I didn't. And so going into Mother's Day, I said, you better be ready with books. I'm not going to play this game with you any longer. And I'm not going to have you tell me, oh, you don't have to focus on that, it's not that big of a deal. I'm a Black woman. I understand over and every single day how I'm disrespected, how people are going to assume what they want to assume about me anytime I enter a room. I know what I want to earn so that I don't have to deal with the distractions of disrespect. So please don't tell me what to focus on or what my goal should be. Just be ready if I do reach my goal. I'll end by saying that.
Wow, that is really something. And what a lesson. And Anna, you just triggered me, because I remembered a meeting was when I did The Big Letdown. It was my first book that was not for Black women, right? Because I had written the Mocha Manual series. And I remember being in that publishing meeting, me and a room full of white people, and they were basically saying, how are we going to market this book when you are a Black woman writing about a book for everybody? And let me tell you the ideas that came across. Don't put my picture on it. That almost made me flip the table. Then they were asking me to stop writing about Black things for about 6 months, so that when they published the book and people would Google search me, there would not be anything Black coming up in my Google. I mean, I can't even remember how I kept my composure through that meeting, but I've given myself goosebumps thinking about it. It just came up for me, the ways that, there are so many, assumptions, expectations. And even if you are a Black person writing about white things, you are still a Black author. And so the pigeonholing is real across the spectrum. And it's really ways that this industry needs to so much work to be done. So much work to be done. Okay, I got off track. I'm sorry because I was triggered. I want to be mindful of our time because this has been such a rich conversation. And so we've had such a robust conversation, but I want to hear from everyone, one, what stories are not being told that need to be told? And then what's got you excited right now in the space of motherhood, and in the storytelling of motherhood? Ricki, you want to start?
I don't know what's missing. I don't know. I mean, I do feel like I feel personally, I feel like I've learned so much obviously in the making these films, becoming a mother, my own personal journey, but then what's going on in the news, it's just a huge learning curve, and I think back, how, just John Waters plucking me from obscurity and giving me my first film, Hairspray, and me being thrown with, drag queens and gay people. I was so sheltered and so just inexperienced with people. And then to take that and then host this show, day in and day out for 11 years, which really represented, the mainstream, multicultural, multi-socioeconomic people, society. And it just, I'm continuing to grow and learn. It's I think about the audacity of hosting that show back when I was 24 and I didn't know who I was, let alone moderating a panel for all these people. And it's a privilege to be kind of, I don't know, representing the masses, putting out these materials. And I would love to know what is missing so I can do more of my part to help make things better.
I think that it's interesting. I mean, for me, the motherhood stories that jump out at me are a lot of the immigration stories, because I used to live and work in Mexico for a long time. And, I really lived and worked in Mexico, like in the early 90s, and really when it was kind of rough and we were even less evolved in thinking about our borders, so for me, it's those stories, I think, the family separations and the detention centers, I don't think I would love to see those told, from a way that's less, I think they're just there's something dehumanizing about right now. I feel like a lot of the narratives are just, using mother's pain for political, to make a political point, as opposed to really understanding why those people have to cross that border. I don't think that there is compassion and understanding that they do not have a choice. And, I don't know. So to me, it's those stories are heart-wrenching. And then the other stories that I would like to see told or be talked about, and you mentioned this before about, how this is kind of this moment for women and mothers. But I think if we are looking, let's say, and this was brought up once in a workshop that I did, and it was a very powerful moment. It was Mama Gina's workshop, Ricki, it was Regina Thomas-Hour's workshop, and there were 800 women in a theater. And we just had a moment where we realized that, there was a white woman and a Black woman, both raising a son, and they were never, ever going to really be able to have a common experience of what that feels like to have a white young man versus a Black young man out in the street. And I think about that almost every day. I have a 14-year-old who looks 17, and he goes out every night with his hoodie and his rap music blasting in his ears, and he goes to the basketball courts and he plays till 10 o'clock at night. And, I think about the perspective, of what my Black mother friends, what my other friends tell me about how they worry, about their teenage boys. And, so that's a place that, I feel like as mothers, where race really is, plays an incomparable role. It's just a very hard piece to get around. And I would like to see that story, even the Black Lives Matter story told, because from more perspective of those mothers, I mean, a lot of those mothers are stepping up, especially the ones that have been victims, have lost their children, to police violence. But I think, I would love to see more of how all mothers can step up around those stories.
Yeah, and I think your thread around compassion and humanity are so critical to how those stories actually need to be told, perhaps differently from the ways that they're being told right now in a lot of media platforms. Anna, did you want to share like what you think is missing and what's got you excited?
Yeah, I would say just based off the experience I've had with this book, that so many people have been like, what a creative idea. Like, how did you come up with this? And I'm like, for me, it's not creative at all. It's shocking that other people haven't told this story already. I'm a Black mother myself. I was writing a story that also humanized me and acknowledged my own identity. And so I think there's so much missing. There's just not enough representation of our differing identities. And I think about Black trans women. I think about just so many that haven't had our stories told. And because the storytellers have been, mostly white men, and that has a terrible effect on us. And so I just think getting more of our voices represented, so it doesn't seem quote unquote creative to have these ideas that simply represent us as who we are.
Yeah, so true, so true. I want to quickly it looks like maybe we lost Tanya. Oh no, Tanya, there? Okay, great.
I'm going to have to go in a minute. I'm so sorry. I thought we were here for an hour. I apologize.
Go ahead. You want to just wrap up and share with us, what stories you think are not being told, but also what's exciting you right now?
I still think there are not enough stories about people of color in general they're just regular people. I mean, I just think there's just not enough. Sorry, I was running up and down the stairs. So I think we just need more stories that humanize all people. And as Anna talked about the various tropes, we need to work around that and be able to tell stories with nuance and make sure that people really get a sense of who we are in general. And what excites me, I think that in this time where we are so divided in so many ways, I think there is opportunity. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to have real talk. I mean, we're at a time now in 2021 where we can have real talk. I mean, there was a time when I was younger and I would sit in rooms with people and I could not voice what we've been talking about right here today. So there is change that has happened, and it's getting better, and we're going to keep coming, and we're not going to stop until the truth is really clear, and until we get some reparations. I'm sorry.
Some spike there. My girlfriends and I have a joke that we were raised like where our parents said, "White people."
Exactly.
Yeah. Restaurants anymore. Like our parents whispered, but
yeah.
we just say white people, right? And so this is our evolution and our growth and our own identity around how we talk about these issues, how we talk about race, and always grateful for those who are willing to be in the conversation, even when it's uncomfortable. And ultimately, for the purpose of this discussion, how we bring that into the work we do around motherhood, because that is incredibly important. Tanya, I want to honor your time. There's a burning question from the audience that I really want to honor. And I want to, be respectful of Ricki for someone's asking for you to speak on this. But I think that, someone's raising a point about the ways that Black women have been portrayed in talk shows. Certainly we can think about, You Are Not the Father, and how that can possibly change. Like, what's this history in terms of the ways that Black women, perhaps low-income Black women, have been portrayed in this particular genre, knowing that you're not in it anymore, and what really needs to change there in terms of that perception? Ricki, you're muted.
I'm so sorry, Kimberly. I also have to hop off, but I just wanted to thank you all so much. It was such an honor, and I hope we get to meet in person someday.
You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finish this question, then we'll.
Yeah, I mean, back then, I look at my show, we were reflecting what was out there in society. So yes, there were unfortunate portrayals of lots of people, including women of color. I always treated everyone with respect in the way I would want to be treated. I felt like it was almost like amateur psychology, like looking at humanity. So yeah, I think people were represented poorly among, everyone. And so, yeah, I don't watch talk shows. I'm not a viewer anymore. I used to love Oprah. Yeah, it doesn't appeal to me anymore. I certainly would probably do things differently, maybe be more sensitive, but I've evolved and I've come into a place of understanding it more and understanding myself more. But yeah, I don't think we did a service.
What's interesting? I just have to interject.
Yeah.
Because we may look at it that way, right, as television, but I will tell you, having traveled the world with Ricki Lake, she is like an honorary sister. Like there is no one. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm a
girl. I was called a homegirl.
She's called a homegirl. Everywhere you go, I'm saying her Black fans are like her biggest fans. And, I'm not excusing the way things were depicted, but I also think that they have a sense of humor about these things. And there's a certain, I don't know if it's seeing themselves represented in any way or the way Ricki always dealt. Like you have to understand the way Ricki dealt in those situations, right? With all these crazy baby mama drama is she treated everybody like with so much respect and so much kindness and so much warmth on that show. Like she was not a snarky talk show host, booking people to humiliate them or, so I do feel in some way it's like, it's interesting because those really are your biggest fans, Ricki, everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
wait, you're muted, Kimberly.
Oh, Kimberly, you're muted now. Wait, what'd you say? We can't hear you. What?
Can you hear?
Now we can.
Okay. No, I was going to say, because I don't think it's about Ricki personally. I think it's more about the industry and the ways. I mean, if you look at Jerry Springer, I think it's happened to Lower too. And I think it's all the way the industry probably moves in that direction. And I was wondering if there was even any space to tell real stories.
I'll just add that I was going back to do after the business of being born, after really evolving and maturing in my own way in my early 40s, I wanted to go back and do a talk show again. And the goal was to do real, true, elevated content, primarily for women, but it was more along the lines of a Phil Donahue, provocative, elevated content. And that's the kind of show I was looking to do. And when I got in business with the company that I worked with, they wanted Kris Jenner. They wanted it was just, we were on different paths. So I don't know whether there's room for like a smart show where everyone feels like they've learned something. I don't know if it's possible these days with what's on television.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, television and the Hollywood industry is exploitative in many, many ways, just hearing you all's business challenges, just knowing the ways that people of color have been portrayed, the ways that they parade Black pain. Like there are so many layers to the exploitation. And, this is why we need to be the creators of it and not just the consumers of it so that we can hopefully be in a position to help change it. I am so honored that you all joined me for this conversation today. I'm sorry I kept you over time.
You're amazing. You're so incredible. It's a pleasure, honestly. And those women, oh my God, I have chills, what important conversation to have.
I know. I can't wait to read Anna's book now.
Yeah, me too. I wrote her name down. I'm like ordering her book.
Yeah, so we got to order Anna's book, The Three Mothers. We have to watch Monster on Netflix this weekend to support Tanya. We have to keep our eyes open for The Business of Birth Control from Abby and Ricki, and also check out The Pill Is Not a Panacea series, which is coming May 19th.
Yeah.
And we have to continue to support those who are in the work of telling the story of motherhood. That is so, so important. And that we continue to do that. I'm excited that now I have the Birthright Podcast where we're focusing on joy in Black birth, only telling positive stories, hosting healing experiences for those who have birth trauma. So really love to stay in touch as you guys think about those added long pieces to this 15th anniversary. I'll be texting. Would love to stay connected about that. And thank you for just the work that you all continue to do, being in the fight, telling this unseen thing. There are so many things about motherhood and womanhood that we don't know. And those stories need to be told so that we can be aware. Like we can't be, enlightened and empowered without information. That those two don't go together. So thank you too for
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I saw some mention foster mothers, aunties who mother, all the ways that mothering shows up. And let's push that next year when we're celebrating Mother's Day, we'll be celebrating paid leave, affordable childcare, and a way to value our unpaid work, because we know that is important for us to have a true Mother's Day. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.